You're petting one dog, just one. Within seconds, a second dog shoves its way between your hands, pushing the first one out entirely, whining and pawing at you like its life depends on getting equal attention. Maybe it even growls at the other dog, just for existing near you. That's not just a dog wanting attention. Researchers now think it might be something much more specific, and much more familiar. So today we're asking, do animals actually feel jealousy the way we do? Or are we just seeing what we want to see? Let's find out. This story starts with a now famous experiment run by a primatologist studying capuchin monkeys. Two monkeys are given the exact same simple task, side by side, and rewarded for completing it with a slice of cucumber. Both monkeys do the task happily, cucumber in hand, no complaints. This goes on repeatedly, no issues at all. Then the researcher changes just one thing. One monkey keeps getting cucumber, the other starts getting a grape instead. A far more desirable, sweeter treat to a monkey. The cucumber monkey, watching this happen in real time, doesn't just get quiet. It refuses to do the task again. It throws the cucumber back at the researcher, sometimes rattling the enclosure in apparent frustration. This became one of the most famous demonstrations of animal fairness ever recorded, and it didn't stop with monkeys. Similar reactions have since been observed in studies involving corvids, dogs, and even mice, when one animal receives a lesser reward than another for the same task. But here's the question it raised that took years to properly answer. Was that actually jealousy? Or something else entirely, wearing jealousy's clothes? Here's where scientists had to slow down, because jealousy and envy get used interchangeably by almost everyone. But researchers treat them as two completely different emotions, built on different mental requirements. Envy is relatively simple. You don't have something someone else does and that bothers you. It only requires two things, you and the thing you want. The cucumber and grape monkey experiment is arguably envy, not jealousy by this stricter definition. Jealousy is stranger and much harder to prove. It requires a triangle. You, someone or something you have a relationship with, and a third party threatening that relationship. That means jealousy requires something envy doesn't. The animal has to understand that a relationship exists in the first place, recognize its own place within it, and then perceive that a rival is putting that place at risk. That's a significantly higher cognitive bar to clear than simply wanting a grape instead of a cucumber. So the real question isn't just, do animals want what other animals have? It's, do animals understand relationships well enough to feel genuinely threatened when someone else moves in on one? For a long time, most scientists assumed the honest answer was no, that this kind of social self-awareness was uniquely human. That assumption didn't hold up for long. To test this properly, researchers borrowed a method originally designed for human infants. Prior studies had already shown that babies as young as 6 months display jealousy when their mother pays warm attention to what looks like another baby, even a realistic doll. Researchers adapted this exact setup for dogs. Owners were instructed to interact affectionately with a lifelike, animatronic-style fake dog. One that moved, made sounds, and appeared realistic enough to seem like a genuine rival. Across the study, dogs consistently reacted with textbook jealous behavior, pushing physically between the owner and the fake dog, whining, barking, and in a number of cases becoming outright aggressive toward it, despite it not being a real animal at all. The dogs weren't just curious about a strange object, they were reacting as if a real threat to their relationship had shown up. This echoes something Charles Darwin actually speculated about back in the 1800s. He specifically guessed that jealousy might exist in dogs, decades before anyone had any scientific way to test the idea. And it's not limited to dogs either. Researchers studying a long-established colony of 17 chimpanzees documented similar jealous behavior when unfamiliar chimps were introduced into the group. Existing chimp pairs with strong social bonds reacted protectively and, at times, aggressively toward the newcomers, especially the pairs whose relationships appeared closest and most established beforehand. Exactly what you'd expect if something like real jealousy were driving the behavior, rather than simple unfamiliarity or fear. Here's where this stops being just behavioral guesswork and starts becoming something you can actually measure. Researchers studying a species of monogamous primate found that when the animals watched their mates interacting closely with a rival, something measurable happened inside their bodies. Testosterone spiked, the same hormone linked to mate guarding and aggression in humans, alongside cortisol, a hormone strongly associated with social stress. Brain imaging went even further, revealing increased activity in two specific regions, one linked to the feeling of social exclusion in humans, and another tied directly to aggressive behavior. In other words, researchers weren't just watching an animal act a certain way from the outside, There was a real internal physiological state showing up, one that closely mirrors what happens inside a jealous human brain when a relationship feels threatened. And this isn't isolated to a lab setting either. Surveys of pet owners consistently report jealousy-like behavior across a much wider range of animals than just dogs and primates, including cats, horses, and even birds, suggesting the pattern researchers have measured carefully in a handful of species might just be the visible tip of something far more widespread. Here's the honest twist, though. Not everyone in the scientific community is convinced this is really jealousy in the full, complex human sense. Some researchers argue we might be looking at simpler, more primitive competitive instincts and interpreting them through a very human lens. A well-known bias in animal research called anthropomorphism, where observers project their own emotional categories onto behavior that might have a completely different underlying cause or evolutionary origin. Adding to the uncertainty, some researchers point out that while dog owners frequently report jealousy in their pets, rigorous experimental evidence proving it conclusively is still surprisingly thin. A similar situation to guilt in dogs, where owners are confident their pets feel it. But controlled studies raise real doubts about whether what looks like guilt is actually guilt at all, or just a learned reaction to a scolding tone of voice. What most researchers do agree on, even amid that uncertainty, is this. Whatever this reaction actually is, it isn't limited to one species, one context, or one type of relationship. Jealousy-like responses have now shown up in studies involving primates, dogs, and evidence suggests it may extend to corvids and other social species that form long-term bonds, suggesting this pattern might be far more evolutionarily old and far more widespread across the animal kingdom than anyone assumed even 20 years ago. So, do animals feel jealousy? The honest scientific answer is probably, at least in dogs and primates, and quite possibly much further across the animal kingdom than we've even properly tested yet. Not necessarily identical to the complex, layered jealousy humans feel, wrapped in years of social conditioning and personal history, but built from the same basic ingredients. A valued relationship, a perceived threat to that relationship, and a real, measurable reaction happening inside the body in response. That means the next time a dog wedges itself between you and another pet, demanding equal attention, it might not just be seeking affection. It might be running one of the oldest social protection instincts in the animal kingdom. One that, evolutionarily speaking, may be a lot closer to our own than we ever gave it credit for. That's the science behind one of the most relatable and most contested animal behaviors there is. If you want the next mystery hiding in the animal kingdom, subscribe, because it turns out we're not nearly as emotionally unique as we like to think.